David Thompson had always dreamed of this moment. Standing in front of the beautiful two-story house with its perfectly manicured lawn and white picket fence, he felt like he had finally made it. After 15 years of working as a computer programmer and saving every penny possible, he and his wife Lisa could finally afford their dream home. Lisa, a nurse at the local children's hospital, stood beside him with tears in her eyes. Their two kids, 12-year-old Sophie and 10-year-old Ryan, were already running around the spacious backyard, their laughter echoing through the quiet neighborhood. The house was everything they had ever wanted: 4 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, and most importantly, it was located in Meadowbrook Hills, one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the city. The real estate agent, Mrs. Chen, smiled as she handed over the keys. "Welcome to Meadowbrook Hills," she said warmly. "I'm sure you're going to love it here. The schools are excellent, the neighbors are friendly, and the homeowners association keeps everything looking perfect." David nodded enthusiastically. He had done his research on the neighborhood. The crime rates were low. The property values had been steadily increasing, and the local elementary school had won several awards for academic excellence. After years of living in a cramped apartment in the city, this felt like paradise. The first few days in their new home were magical. The family spent their time unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and exploring their new surroundings. The neighborhood was picture-perfect, with tree-lined streets, beautiful gardens, and houses that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Every morning, David would sit on his front porch with his coffee, watching neighbors jog by or walk their dogs. Everything seemed peaceful and welcoming. Lisa quickly got to work making the house feel like home. She planted flowers in the front garden, hung family photos on the walls, and even baked cookies for their new neighbors. The kids were excited about starting at their new school and had already spotted other children in the neighborhood they hoped to befriend. It was on their 3rd week in the house when the first letter arrived. David found it tucked under his windshield wiper when he came home from work. The envelope was official-looking, with Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association printed in bold letters across the top. David opened it curiously, expecting maybe a welcome message or information about community events. Instead, he found a violation notice. According to the letter, their mailbox was not in compliance with neighborhood standards. The notice stated that mailboxes must be painted in approved black color code number 2B2B2B, and theirs was apparently the wrong shade. David looked at their mailbox, confused. It was black, just like every other mailbox on the street. He walked down the block, comparing their mailbox to others, but couldn't see any difference. Some mailboxes looked older and more faded than theirs, yet they seemed to be the only ones who received a notice. "Maybe it's just a mistake," Lisa said when David showed her the letter. "New homeowners probably get these automatically. We should just repaint it to be safe." So David spent his Saturday morning repainting their mailbox with the exact paint color specified in the violation notice. He even bought the paint from the specific store mentioned in the HOA guidelines. As he painted, several neighbors walked by and he waved hello, hoping to strike up conversations. Most just nodded politely and kept walking. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This time it was about their holiday decorations. The Thompson family had put up some simple Christmas lights and a small wreath on their front door, nothing elaborate or flashy. But according to the HOA, their decorations were too prominent and violated the community's aesthetic guidelines. David was baffled. As he drove through the neighborhood that evening, he saw houses with far more elaborate decorations, inflatable Santa Clauses, light displays that could be seen from space, and lawn ornaments covering entire front yards. Yet his family's modest decorations were somehow problematic. "This is getting weird," David told Lisa that night. "I mean, look at the Henderson house 3 streets over. They have a 12-foot inflatable snowman and enough lights to power a small city. But our little wreath is too much?" Lisa frowned as she read the letter. "Maybe we should go to the next HOA meeting and ask about this. There might be some rules we don't understand." The 3rd violation notice arrived just before New Year's. This time it was about their children's basketball hoop. Ryan and Sophie had been enjoying shooting hoops in their driveway, and David had installed a portable basketball hoop for them. According to the HOA, the hoop was improperly positioned and created a safety hazard. David was frustrated now. The basketball hoop was well within their property line, positioned exactly where the previous homeowner had kept theirs. He had even seen the old photos from the real estate listing showing a basketball hoop in the same spot. When he asked his neighbor, Mr. Williams, about it, the man just shrugged and said he'd never had any problems with his basketball hoop. As David looked around the neighborhood, he noticed that several other families had basketball hoops, playground equipment, and even trampolines in their yards. None of them seemed to have received violation notices. A growing suspicion began to form in his mind, but he pushed it away, not wanting to believe what he was thinking. The Thompson family started to feel like they were walking on eggshells in their own neighborhood. Every time they did something normal, bringing in groceries, letting the kids play outside, or working in their garden, David found himself wondering if they would receive another violation notice. Lisa began keeping a notebook, documenting each violation notice and taking photos of similar situations in other yards that seemed to be ignored by the HOA. She was methodical by nature, a skill that served her well as a nurse, and something about the whole situation didn't sit right with her. "I want to be good neighbors," she told David one evening. "But this feels like we're being singled out for things that everyone else does." The stress was starting to affect the whole family. Sophie had mentioned that some kids at school seemed to know who she was but weren't very friendly. Ryan had stopped playing basketball in the driveway, worried about getting his parents in trouble. What should have been the happiest time in their lives was turning into a source of constant anxiety. David began researching the HOA's history and rules, staying up late reading through documents and trying to understand why their family seemed to be under such scrutiny. He discovered that Meadowbrook Hills had very few diverse families, something he hadn't really noticed during their house hunting process. As he drove through the neighborhood with fresh eyes, he realized that his family stood out in ways he hadn't considered before. The dream of their perfect home was slowly turning into something else entirely. But David and Lisa had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to give up easily. They decided they would find a way to make this work, no matter what challenges lay ahead. What they didn't know was that their real test was just beginning. Winter turned to spring, and the Thompson family hoped things would improve. They had been living in Meadowbrook Hills for 6 months now, and David thought maybe the HOA had just been testing new residents. He was wrong. The violation notices not only continued but became more frequent and increasingly ridiculous. In March, they received a notice about their garbage cans being visible from the street for more than 30 minutes after pickup. Lisa had been at work during her 12-hour shift at the hospital, and David was stuck in an important meeting. Their 10-year-old son, Ryan, had even tried to bring the cans in after school, but apparently he was 20 minutes too late. David walked through the neighborhood that evening, notebook in hand. On Maple Street, the Johnson family's garbage cans had been sitting out for 2 days. On Oak Avenue, Mrs. Peterson's cans were overflowing and hadn't been brought in since pickup 3 days ago. None of these families had received violations. "This is insane," David muttered to himself as he photographed the evidence. He was starting to feel like a detective in his own neighborhood. The next violation came in April. Their lawn was apparently improperly maintained. David stared at the letter in disbelief. He had hired Greenscape Lawn Care, the same company that maintained half the lawns in Meadowbrook Hills. Their lawn looked identical to everyone else's. Green, trimmed and well-maintained. When David called Greenscape to ask about it, the owner, Mr. Rodriguez, was just as confused. "Mr. Thompson, your lawn is in perfect condition," he said. "I've been doing lawns in that neighborhood for 15 years, and yours is one of the best-looking properties on the block." Lisa was getting worried about the stress this was putting on their family. David was losing sleep, constantly checking their property for potential violations. The kids were becoming nervous about playing outside, afraid they might do something wrong. Sophie had stopped inviting friends over because she was embarrassed about the constant HOA notices. In May, things got worse. The HOA started conducting what they called random property inspections. David came home from work one Tuesday to find 3 people in official-looking vests standing in his driveway, taking photos and making notes on clipboards. "Excuse me," David said as he got out of his car. "Can I help you?" A woman with short blonde hair turned around. She wore a badge that said Patricia Miller, HOA board member. Her smile was cold and professional. "We're conducting a routine property inspection, Mr. Thompson, just making sure everything is up to community standards." David watched as they photographed his house from multiple angles, measured the height of his fence, and even counted the number of flowers in his garden beds. The whole process felt invasive and humiliating, especially since neighbors were starting to come outside to watch the spectacle. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" David asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "We'll let you know if we find any violations," Patricia replied without really answering his question. The inspection team spent 45 minutes on his property, far longer than seemed necessary for a routine check. 2 days later, David received a violation notice about his fence being 2 inches too tall. He measured it himself 3 times. It was exactly the height specified in the HOA guidelines. When he requested a remeasurement, the HOA told him their measurements were final, and he would need to pay for an independent surveyor if he wanted to dispute it. The random inspections became monthly events, but David noticed that truly random they were not. He started keeping track of which houses were inspected. Somehow his house was selected for inspection every month, while most of his neighbors hadn't been inspected once. The social isolation was becoming harder to ignore. Lisa had tried to join the neighborhood book club, but she was told it was full, even though she could see only 6 women attending meetings at the coffee shop, and the flyer had said they were looking for new members. When Sophie tried to join the local soccer team, the coach said they weren't accepting new players, but 2 weeks later, the Williamses' daughter from down the street joined without any problems. David decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting in June. The meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood's main entrance. When David walked in, conversation stopped. The 15 people in attendance stared at him as he found a seat in the back row. Patricia Miller, who apparently served as the board president, called the meeting to order. The agenda was full of typical HOA business: budget discussions, landscaping contracts, and community event planning. David waited patiently for the opportunity to speak. When the floor was opened for resident concerns, David stood up. "I'd like to discuss the violation notices my family has been receiving," he began. Patricia consulted her papers. "Mr. Thompson, if you have specific legal questions about violations, you'll need to submit them in writing at least 2 weeks before the meeting." "I wasn't aware of that rule," David said. "I just want to understand why my family seems to be receiving more violations than other residents for the same issues." Several board members exchanged glances. A man David didn't recognize spoke up. "Mr. Thompson, the HOA enforces all rules equally. If you're receiving violations, it's because you're not in compliance." David felt his frustration rising. "But I have photos showing other properties with the same conditions that haven't received violations." "Photos taken by residents are not considered valid evidence," Patricia said firmly. "Only official HOA documentation counts." The meeting moved on to other business, and David realized he wasn't going to get answers. As people filed out after the meeting, he tried to approach individual board members, but they seemed to avoid him or gave him brief, unhelpful responses. Walking to his car, David overheard 2 board members talking in the parking lot. "We need to be more careful," one said. "He's starting to ask too many questions." David pretended not to hear, but his heart was racing. The conversation confirmed what he had been suspecting but hoping wasn't true. At home, Lisa was waiting up for him. "How did it go?" she asked. David sat down heavily at their kitchen table. "I think we have a serious problem," he said. "This isn't about HOA rules or property standards. This is about us." Lisa had been thinking the same thing but hadn't wanted to say it out loud. "What do we do?" "I don't know yet," David said. "But I'm not going to let them drive us out of our own home." The violations continued through the summer. They were cited for having their garage door open during the day while unloading groceries from a family trip. They received a notice about excessive noise when the kids were playing in their backyard on a Saturday afternoon. At the same time, 3 other families on their street were having loud pool parties. In August, Sophie came home from a neighborhood birthday party in tears. When Lisa asked what happened, Sophie said the other kids had been whispering about how her family was always in trouble with the HOA, and maybe they should move somewhere else. That night, Lisa and David had a serious conversation about whether they should just give up and move. They had put their life savings into this house, and moving would mean taking a significant financial loss. More importantly, running away would mean letting the bullies win. "We worked too hard to get here," Lisa said. "Our kids deserve to grow up in a safe neighborhood with good schools. We're not the ones doing anything wrong." David agreed, but he was starting to worry about what the HOA might do next. The violation fines were adding up, and some of the more recent notices had mentioned potential legal action if issues weren't resolved. He had tried to address every violation, but it seemed like no matter what they did, the HOA found new problems. September brought the most serious escalation yet. David received a certified letter stating that the HOA was placing a lien on their property for unpaid fines totaling $3,200. The letter gave them 30 days to pay or face potential foreclosure proceedings. David stared at the letter in shock. Many of the fines listed were for violations he had corrected immediately, and some were for issues he was certain had never existed in the first place. He had kept detailed records of every interaction with the HOA, including photos and receipts showing how they had addressed each violation. That evening, Lisa found David sitting in their living room, staring out the window at their beautiful neighborhood. "We need help," he said quietly. "This has gone way beyond what we can handle on our own." Lisa nodded. She had been thinking the same thing. Maybe it's time to call a lawyer. Neither of them had ever imagined they would need legal help to live peacefully in their own home. But as they looked at the stack of violation notices and the threatening letter about the lien, they realized they were facing something much bigger than petty HOA disputes. The fight for their home was about to begin in earnest. Lisa Thompson sat across from attorney Michael Chen in his downtown office, a thick folder of documents between them. David was beside her, and both of them felt nervous about taking this step. They had never sued anyone in their lives, and the idea felt overwhelming. Michael Chen specialized in civil rights cases and had been recommended by Lisa's colleague at the hospital. He was in his 40s with kind eyes and a reputation for taking on difficult cases. As he flipped through the Thompson family's documentation, his expression grew more serious. "You've done excellent work documenting everything," Michael said, spreading out photos and violation notices across his desk. "This level of detailed record-keeping is going to be crucial." Lisa had been methodical from the beginning, photographing their property after each violation notice and documenting similar conditions throughout the neighborhood that were ignored. David had kept every piece of correspondence with the HOA and had even started recording the dates and times of the monthly random inspections. "The pattern here is pretty clear," Michael continued. "You've received 47 violation notices in 18 months, while I can see from your documentation that neighbors with identical situations have received 0. That's not normal HOA enforcement." David leaned forward. "So you think we have a case?" Michael nodded slowly. "I think you have more than a case. This looks like systematic harassment based on discriminatory practices. But proving it in court is going to require more than just the violation notices. We need to show intent." The lawyer explained that they would need to investigate the HOA's communication records, board meeting minutes, and enforcement patterns with other residents. It would be expensive and time-consuming, and there was no guarantee of success. "The good news," Michael said, "is that I work on contingency for these types of cases. That means you don't pay unless we win. The bad news is that going up against an HOA means going up against their insurance company and their lawyers, who will fight hard to avoid setting a precedent." Lisa and David exchanged glances. They had already invested everything in their home. They couldn't afford to lose it now. "What's our first step?" Lisa asked. Michael smiled. "We file a lawsuit and start the discovery process. That's when things get interesting." The legal papers were filed 3 weeks later. David had never seen his name on a lawsuit before, and it felt surreal. The case was officially titled Thompson versus Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association and alleged discriminatory enforcement of community rules based on race. The HOA's response was swift and aggressive. Within days, the Thompson family received a new violation notice about their lawn sprinkler system allegedly creating water runoff onto community property. David checked their sprinklers and found them working perfectly, with no runoff onto anyone else's property. "They're trying to intimidate you," Michael explained during their next meeting. "It's a common tactic. They want you to feel like fighting back only makes things worse." But the legal discovery process was starting to reveal information that made David and Lisa realize how deep the problem went. Michael's team had subpoenaed the HOA's email records, board meeting minutes, and violation enforcement data for the past 5 years. What they found was shocking. In 18 months, the Thompson family had received 47 violations, The family who had lived in their house before them, the Hendersons, had lived there for 8 years and received a total of 3 violations. The difference was stark, especially since the Hendersons had owned pets, hosted large parties, and had maintained their property to a lower standard than the Thompsons. Even more revealing was the enforcement data for the entire neighborhood. Michael's team discovered that in a community of 200 homes, violation notices were heavily concentrated on just a few properties. The Thompson family had received more violations than 180 of their neighbors combined. This data tells a story, Michael explained to David and Lisa during a meeting in November. It shows that the HOA's enforcement isn't random or based on actual violations. It's targeted. But the real breakthrough came when Michael's team gained access to the HOA board's email communications. What they found made everyone in the room go quiet. In an email thread from 2 months after the Thompson family moved in, Board President Patricia Miller had written to other board members, "We need to be more vigilant about maintaining our community standards now that the neighborhood demographic is changing." Another board member, Robert Kane, had replied, "I agree. Property values depend on keeping the right kind of families here." The emails got worse. In one exchange about the Thompson family's holiday decorations, Patricia Miller wrote, "We can't let them think they can just move in and change our neighborhood culture." Michael looked up from his laptop after reading the emails aloud. These communications show clear discriminatory intent. This isn't about HOA rules. This is about trying to force your family out because of who you are. David felt sick to his stomach. He had suspected this was the case, but seeing it in writing made it real in a way that was hard to process. "So what happens now?" "Now we have evidence of discrimination," Michael said. "But we need to be prepared for their defense. They're going to claim these emails are taken out of context or that they refer to something else entirely." The HOA's lawyers, led by a firm called Davidson and Associates, began their counterattack immediately. They filed motions claiming the Thompsons were litigious residents who had repeatedly violated clearly stated community guidelines and were now attempting to use false claims of discrimination to avoid accountability. The legal battle intensified over the winter. Michael's team continued gathering evidence, while the HOA's lawyers fought every request for information. They claimed attorney-client privilege, argued that internal communications were confidential, and filed motion after motion to limit what evidence could be used in court. During this time, life in Meadowbrook Hills became even more difficult for the Thompson family. Some neighbors began actively avoiding them, crossing the street when they saw them coming. Others seemed supportive but were afraid to say anything publicly. However, a few neighbors began reaching out privately. Mrs. Chen, the real estate agent who had sold them the house, called Lisa one evening. "I wanted you to know that I think what's happening to your family is wrong," she said. "I've been selling homes in this neighborhood for 10 years, and I've never seen the HOA treat anyone the way they're treating you." Mrs. Chen revealed that she had sold homes to other diverse families over the years, but most had moved away within 2 years. "I always wondered why," she said. "Now I'm starting to understand." Michael's investigation uncovered even more troubling patterns. The HOA had a history of targeting families who didn't fit their preferred demographic. In 2019, a Latino family had received 36 violations in their first year before moving away. In 2017, an Asian family had been cited, repeatedly for cultural landscaping that was inappropriate for the community aesthetic. "This isn't just about your family," Michael told David and Lisa. "This is a pattern of behavior designed to maintain racial exclusivity in the neighborhood." As spring arrived, Michael felt confident they had a strong case. The evidence of discriminatory enforcement was overwhelming. The email communications showed clear intent, and the pattern of behavior toward other diverse families established a history of discrimination. But he warned David and Lisa that the legal process would get more intense before it was over. "HOA discrimination cases can be very emotional," he said. "They're going to try to make this about everything except discrimination. They'll claim you're bad neighbors, that you don't maintain your property, that you're disruptive to the community." David was ready for the fight. After months of documentation and investigation, he finally had proof that his family's experience wasn't in their imagination or the result of their own mistakes. "We've done everything right," he said. "We maintain our property, we follow the rules, we're good neighbors. If they want to go to court and make their case, we'll be ready. Lisa agreed, but she was thinking about their kids. Sophie and Ryan had been affected by the stress and uncertainty. They deserved to live in a place where they felt welcome and safe. Whatever happens in court, Lisa said, I want my children to know that we stood up for what was right. I want them to know that when someone tries to bully you, you don't have to just take it. As they prepared for trial, none of them could have predicted how much attention the case would attract or how their fight for fairness would spark a much larger conversation about discrimination in American neighborhoods. The real battle was just beginning. The story broke on a Tuesday morning in June. Local news reporter Jennifer Walsh had been investigating housing discrimination cases across the metro area when she came across the Thompson lawsuit. What started as a routine court filing had become something much bigger when the HOA's discriminatory emails were leaked to the media. Lisa Thompson was getting ready for her shift at the hospital when her phone started buzzing with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The first few were reporters asking for interviews. By noon, there were news vans parked outside their house. Discrimination lawsuit rocks exclusive neighborhood, read the headline on Channel 7's website. The story included excerpts from the HOA board emails and quotes from attorney Michael Chen about the pattern of harassment the Thompson family had endured. David came home from work to find his street crowded with reporters, cameras, and curious neighbors. A reporter approached him as he got out of his car. Mr. Thompson, how do you feel about the national attention your case is receiving? National attention? David asked, confused. He hadn't realized the story had spread beyond local news. That evening, the Thompson family watched in amazement as their story appeared on cable news programs. The case had struck a nerve across the country, with commentators discussing broader issues of housing discrimination and neighborhood exclusion. But the attention was a double-edged sword. While many people were supportive, others were critical. Online comment sections filled with people arguing about whether the Thompson family was really facing discrimination or just playing the race card to get out of legitimate HOA violations. The neighborhood itself became deeply divided. Some residents were horrified by the revelations about the HOA board's behavior. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived 2 streets over, knocked on the Thompsons' door one evening with a casserole and an apology. I had no idea what was happening, she said. If I had known, I would have spoken up sooner. What they've been doing to your family is wrong. Other neighbors formed a group called Meadowbrook Hills Neighbors for Equality and began organizing support for the Thompson family. They started attending HOA meetings in larger numbers and demanding accountability from the board. But there was also significant pushback. A countergroup formed, led by longtime resident Barbara Stevens, arguing that the HOA was simply enforcing rules fairly and that the lawsuit was dividing the community. They held their own meetings and started a petition defending the HOA board's actions. The division was affecting the children too. Sophie and Ryan Thompson found themselves at the center of attention at school, with some classmates being more supportive and others echoing negative things they had heard their parents say. Sophie came home one day upset because a girl in her class had said, "My mom says your family is trying to destroy our neighborhood." Ryan was confused when his best friend's parents suddenly said he couldn't come over to play anymore. The media attention intensified when investigative reporters began digging deeper into the story. Channel 7's Jennifer Walsh obtained additional HOA documents that revealed the scope of the discrimination wasn't limited to the Thompson family. Her follow-up report, A Pattern of Exclusion, documented how the Meadowbrook Hills HOA had systematically targeted diverse families for years. The report included interviews with 3 families who had moved away from the neighborhood after facing similar harassment. Carlos and Ana Ruiz had lived in Meadowbrook Hills for just 14 months before moving in 2019. We received violation after violation for things our neighbors were doing without any problems, Carlos told the reporter. We thought maybe we were just bad at following rules, but now we see it was something else entirely. The story went viral on social media. Justice for the Thompsons began trending on Twitter, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences of discrimination in housing and neighborhood associations. But the viral attention also brought negative reactions. The Thompson family started receiving hate mail and threatening phone calls. Someone spray-painted "Go home" on their garage door one night. Lisa found nasty notes tucked under her car's windshield wipers. "I didn't expect this level of hatred," Lisa told David one evening as they cleaned up another mess someone had left on their lawn. "I thought most people would understand that what we're fighting for is just basic fairness." The HOA, meanwhile, hired a public relations firm to manage the crisis. They issued statements claiming the emails had been taken out of context and that their enforcement had always been colorblind and consistent. Patricia Miller, the HOA board president, gave an interview to the local newspaper defending the board's actions. "We have never discriminated against anyone," she insisted. "We enforce community standards equally for all residents. The Thompson family has received violations because they have repeatedly failed to comply with clearly stated rules. But the PR strategy backfired when more damaging information emerged." A former HOA board member, who had resigned in protest 2 years earlier, came forward with additional evidence of discriminatory practices. Tom Bradley had served on the HOA board for 3 years before quitting in frustration. "I couldn't be part of what they were doing anymore," he told reporters. "There were conversations in closed sessions about maintaining neighborhood character that made me very uncomfortable. When I raised concerns about selective enforcement, I was basically pushed out." Bradley provided meeting minutes and his own notes that corroborated the pattern of discrimination. His testimony gave the media story additional credibility and put more pressure on the remaining board members. The legal case was also heating up. Michael Chen's team had uncovered even more evidence during the discovery process, including recorded phone calls between board members discussing strategies to encourage certain residents to move elsewhere. In one particularly damaging recording, board member Robert Kane could be heard saying, "If we make their lives difficult enough, they'll eventually get the message and find somewhere more suitable." As the trial date approached, both sides were preparing for a high-profile court battle. The HOA had hired one of the city's most expensive law firms and was fighting the case aggressively. They filed motion after motion, challenging the evidence and arguing that their enforcement had been legitimate. Davidson and Associates, the HOA's law firm, began a campaign to discredit the Thompson family. They hired investigators to look into David and Lisa's backgrounds, searching for anything that might make them appear less sympathetic to a jury. They also began challenging individual violation notices, claiming that each one was justified and that the pattern of enforcement was coincidental rather than discriminatory. Just because someone receives multiple violations doesn't mean they're being discriminated against, their lead attorney argued in court filings. It might just mean they're not good at following rules. But Michael Chen was confident in his case. The evidence of discriminatory intent was overwhelming, and the pattern of selective enforcement was clear. More importantly, public opinion seemed to be shifting in favor of the Thompson family. A poll conducted by the local newspaper found that 67% of metro area residents believed the Thompson family had been discriminated against. Support was even higher among younger residents and people who had experienced discrimination themselves. The case had also attracted attention from national civil rights organizations. The NAACP announced they would be filing an amicus brief supporting the Thompson family, and the Fair Housing Alliance offered additional legal resources. As summer turned to fall, Meadowbrook Hills remained divided. Some neighbors had become close friends and allies of the Thompson family, while others continued to support the HOA board. Property showing declined as potential buyers were put off by the negative publicity and ongoing legal battle. "All we wanted was to live peacefully in our home," David told a reporter as the trial date approached. "We never asked for any of this attention. But if our case helps prevent other families from going through what we've experienced, then maybe something good will come out of it." Lisa was thinking about their children and what lessons they would take from this experience. "I want Sophie and Ryan to understand that standing up for what's right isn't always easy," she said. "Sometimes it means fighting battles you never wanted to fight. But some things are worth fighting." 4. As the community prepared for a trial that would determine not just the Thompson family's future, but potentially set precedents for neighborhood discrimination across the country, no one could predict the shocking turn the case was about to take. The courthouse was packed on the morning of October 15th. David and Lisa Thompson sat at the plaintiff's table with their attorney, Michael Chen, trying to stay calm as jury selection began. After 2 years of legal battles, their case was finally going to trial. The jury selection process took 3 days. Both sides carefully questioned potential jurors about their experiences with homeowners associations, their views on discrimination, and their ability to be fair. Michael Chen was looking for people who could understand that discrimination doesn't always come with obvious signs, while the HOA's lawyers wanted jurors who would focus strictly on whether specific violations were legitimate. The final jury included 12 people from diverse backgrounds: a retired teacher, a small business owner, 2 nurses, an engineer, a store manager, and others. David felt cautiously optimistic as he looked at their faces during opening statements. Michael Chen's opening was straightforward and powerful. He walked the jury through the timeline of harassment, showed them the discriminatory emails, and presented the statistical evidence of selective enforcement. "This case isn't complicated," he told the jury. "The evidence will show you a clear pattern of discrimination designed to force the Thompson family out of their home." The HOA's lead attorney, Margaret Davidson, painted a different picture. She argued that the Thompson family had received violations because they had genuinely failed to follow community rules. Every violation was legitimate, she insisted. The HOA has a responsibility to maintain community standards for all residents. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Michael Chen methodically presented evidence showing the pattern of discrimination. He called former HOA board member Tom Bradley to testify about the closed-door conversations about neighborhood character. He presented the statistical analysis showing how violations were concentrated on diverse families. Most powerfully, he played the recorded phone conversations where board members discussed making certain residents' lives difficult enough to encourage them to move. The HOA's defense focused on trying to justify individual violations. They brought in experts to testify about proper mailbox colors and lawn maintenance standards. They argued that the Thompson family's decorations really had been too prominent, and that their fence really was too tall. But their case began falling apart when Patricia Miller took the stand. Under cross-examination, she struggled to explain why identical situations throughout the neighborhood had been treated differently. When Michael Chen showed her photos of other residents with the same violations that had been ignored, she claimed she couldn't remember specific details. The most damaging moment came when Michael Chen played one of the recorded phone calls and asked Patricia Miller to explain what she meant by maintaining neighborhood character. "I was referring to property values," she said unconvincingly. "Property values?" Michael Chen asked. "Or the demographics of property owners?" Patricia Miller's pause was long enough for everyone in the courtroom to notice. "Property values," she repeated. But the damage was done. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up and delivered their verdict. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA was guilty of discriminatory enforcement and housing discrimination. They awarded the Thompson family $2.3 million in damages, one of the largest HOA discrimination settlements in the state's history. David and Lisa hugged each other as the verdict was read, tears streaming down their faces. After 2 years of stress, uncertainty, and harassment, they had finally been vindicated. But what happened next shocked everyone, including their own attorney. At the press conference after the trial, reporters expected David and Lisa to announce they were moving away from Meadowbrook Hills. Instead, they announced something completely different. "We're not going anywhere," David said firmly. "This is our home, and we're going to make sure what happened to us never happens to another family." Lisa stepped up to the microphone. "We're going to use a portion of our settlement to purchase additional properties in Meadowbrook Hills. We're going to renovate them and sell them to diverse families at affordable prices." The plan was ambitious and unprecedented. Over the next 18 months, the Thompson family used $800,000 of their settlement to purchase 3 foreclosed properties in the neighborhood. They spent another $400,000 renovating these homes to beautiful condition, then sold them to carefully selected families at significantly below market value. The first family to benefit was the Johnsons, a young black couple with twin toddlers who were both teachers. The second was the Patels, an Indian-American family where both parents were doctors. The third was the Garcias, a Latino family with 3 children who had been priced out of other good school districts. But the real transformation came when HOA board elections were held the following spring. Lisa Thompson decided to run for the board, along with several neighbors who had supported them throughout the legal battle. The election campaign was intense. Patricia Miller and the old guard fought hard to maintain control, arguing that new leadership would destroy property values and community standards. They put up signs saying, "Keep Meadowbrook Hills great," and held meetings warning about outside agitators changing their neighborhood. But the demographics of the neighborhood had begun to shift. The new families the Thompsons had helped move in were eligible to vote, and many longtime residents had been horrified by the revelations during the trial. On Election Day, Lisa Thompson won her seat by a landslide, and two other pro-diversity candidates also won seats. The new board's first action was to completely rewrite the HOA's enforcement policies. They established clear, objective standards for violations and created an appeals process for residents who felt they were being treated unfairly. They also implemented transparency requirements, making board communications and violation data available to all residents. David Thompson was elected HOA president 6 months later, running unopposed after Patricia Miller resigned and moved out of the neighborhood. Under new leadership, Meadowbrook Hills began to transform in ways no one had expected. The increased diversity brought new energy and ideas to the community. The Patel family started a community garden that became a gathering place for neighbors. The Garcia family organized the first annual International Food Festival, which drew visitors from across the metro area. Property values, contrary to the fears of some longtime residents, actually increased. The positive media attention from the Thompson family's victory and the neighborhood's transformation attracted young professionals who wanted to live in a diverse, welcoming community. Most importantly, the culture of the neighborhood changed completely. Instead of suspicion and exclusion, there was now genuine community spirit. Children of all backgrounds played together in the streets. Neighbors helped each other with yard work and babysitting. The annual block party became the most popular community event. Sophie and Ryan Thompson, who had endured so much stress during the legal battle, thrived in the new environment. Sophie became best friends with the Patel's daughter and helped start a neighborhood tutoring program. Ryan joined a pickup basketball team that included kids from all the new families. The transformation attracted national attention. Meadowbrook Hills became a case study for how neighborhoods could successfully integrate and thrive. Urban planning experts visited to study the community's evolution, and the Thompson family was invited to speak at conferences about housing discrimination and community building. Lisa Thompson was featured on the cover of a national magazine with the headline, "From Victim to Victor: How One Family Changed Their Neighborhood Forever." The article detailed how their legal victory had led to something much more powerful, a complete cultural transformation. "We never set out to change the world," Lisa said in the interview. "We just wanted to live peacefully in our home." But sometimes fighting for your own rights opens doors for everyone else too. David reflected on their journey during a neighborhood barbecue 2 years after the trial. He watched his children playing with kids from 6 different ethnic backgrounds and remembered how isolated and unwelcome they had felt when they first moved in. The people who tried to drive us out thought diversity would hurt this neighborhood, he told a reporter who was writing a follow-up story. Instead, it made us stronger than we ever imagined possible. The Meadowbrook Hills story became a symbol of hope for families facing discrimination across the country. It proved that fighting back against injustice could lead not just to personal victory, but to positive change that benefited entire communities. Michael Chen, their attorney, often used their case as an example when speaking to other civil rights lawyers. The Thompson family didn't just win their lawsuit, he would say. They won their neighborhood back and made it better for everyone. As David looked around at his thriving, diverse community, he realized that what had started as the worst experience of his family's life had become something beautiful. They had turned discrimination into opportunity, exclusion into inclusion, and fear into friendship. The dream home they had almost lost had become something even better, the foundation for a dream community where every family, regardless of their background, could truly feel welcome. 3 years later, Meadowbrook Hills had a waiting list of families hoping to move there. It had become exactly what its original residents had claimed to want, a neighborhood where property values were high, children were safe, and community standards were maintained. The only difference was that now those benefits were available to everyone.